Evolutionary Underground, episode 51 is coming your way. Today we're talking about biohacking and gene manipulation by Geneza Pharma. So this is going to be a really interesting topic. We're going to talk about what is biohacking, what is gene manipulation. Some of you don't even know what it is. You never even heard of this stuff, or you have heard about it. We're going to kind of explain what it means. There's a lot to talk about on this topic. We're going to talk about, is the science there yet? We're going to kind of debate that a little bit. We're going to talk about PED biohacking, how you can use steroids to your advantage, how you can use Geneza Pharma steroids to your advantage to get you there and get you where you want to go. We're going to talk about why we recommend Geneza Pharma. Before we get into it, though, let me remind everyone we are on Apple, we are on Spotify as well. We're on many different platforms. I like to listen to the podcast when I'm driving. If I have to drive like an hour or something, I like to listen to the podcast. Very entertaining, even for me. It's entertaining to hear myself. It's entertaining to hear Mobster. And at the end of the day, we're always trying to make this podcast better. So we are listening. So feel free to comment, like, sub, give us reviews and all that stuff. That helps the algorithms pick up the podcast so we can keep this podcast going. Remember, we're not sponsored like other podcasts. We don't go and do advertisements for people and all this other stuff like these other podcasts. We don't interrupt the podcast halfway through to do a 30-second spot on advertising. So we're dependent on you to keep the podcast going. So let's get into it, Mobster. Let me start off with what is biohacking. And look, biohacking is very simple. It's the practice of making changes to your environment, diet, and or lifestyle. And I'm going to dumb each of these down. Environment. What does that mean? Simply living in a place where you're sharing a wall with a neighbor in an apartment. I've been there, done that. The first time I moved out of my parents' house, I went and got an apartment. Really, really excited about it. It wasn't so exciting a year later when I was living there, when a neighbor moved in across my wall who liked to blare heavy metal music at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. It also wasn't fun having to hear a bird outside my window chirping at 2 or 3 a.m. It was a songbird, and I did some research on it at the time and found out these fucking songbirds during mating season chirp and chirp and chirp and chirp. So he would chirp for like an hour, keeping me up every fucking night. I also didn't like that some guy had a loud ass car in the parking lot outside my window, and every morning at like 5 o'clock, I'd hear. Vroom, vroom, vroom. So at the end of the day, environment matters. Also, do you live in a place that used to be a farm or a ranch or something where they drenched pesticides all over the place? That's environment. Do you live in a place that's polluted, that has bad air pollution? So if you go for a jog around your neighborhood, you're breathing all that shit in. That's environment. There's lots of environmental factors. Diet. You can drastically biohack your diet and completely change your diet. If I go to most people's homes and I look in their pantry and their fridge and their freezer, I would say 99% of the food they have in there is not good for them. So literally going in there and just picking all your food up. I've done this before, by the way. When I was in my mid 20s, I got myself out of shape about 2 or 3 years of being out of shape. That was really the only time in my life I've really been out of shape. And I said, enough is enough. I got a cardboard box. I boxed up all the junk food that I have and I took it down and I donated it. And I went to the grocery store and I got clean food. I made that change. So diet is huge. And then lifestyle overall, everything from what do you do after work? Do you go out drinking after work? Do you go out to the bar after work? Do you go clubbing every Friday and Saturday night and stay out till 3, 4 a.m.? Do you, do recreational drugs? Do you smoke? Do you do any of the stuff that harms you from a lifestyle perspective? That's biohacking. You can literally change things. So you can improve your lifestyle drastically by changing those things. And the idea behind biohacking is the way you can help your body function at or near peak performance so you improve your lifespan and optimize your athletic goals. So specifically in bodybuilding, it's usually all about putting on more muscle, losing more body fat, having plenty of energy for cardio weights, and sleeping so you can recover the best. Also, I believe in bodybuilding world, many people take a do-it-yourself approach. Since bodybuilding is such a personal and individual sport, I won't say selfish sport, but it is an individual sport. So a lot of people will tend to learn things on their own through trial and error, or they'll learn things from the social media gurus online. Maybe some dude off of YouTube or maybe a podcast such as the one we're doing now. I mean, no offense to the other podcasts, but I'd say 95% of the podcasts out there on this stuff are crap. But if you're lucky enough to listen to this podcast, you can use our podcast to help you biohack. And some of the things that we talk about and nobody else talks about is things like fasting, for example, when it comes to diet. Fasting is a weapon. We see guys on the forum who are competing and they're using fasting. They're using 1 meal a day fasting. They're doing 36-hour fasting, 48-hour fasting. They're doing time restricted eating. It helps them stay lean. It helps them stay tight. It helps them stay as ripped as possible year round. So that's a biohack that we've talked about on this podcast many times that other podcasts don't talk about. So you have to make sure you're picking the right podcast to listen to and not just picking the podcast that has clickbait to show you what you're doing. So that's bodybuilding, Mobster. I think that's the bodybuilding biohack. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I'd agree. My initial response to the idea, and this is, it was actually me suggested this show, was, and I looked at a couple of simple ways that people have described it, and this is kind of sort of made me think, what the fuck? And then I kind of hang on. A lot of what we do to train to get better at training is biohacking, right? So there's a few points. One was specifically the idea of it being some sort of social movement. And I was like, yeah, that's like, sexual identity and all that kind of stuff. I'm an old fucker. I don't give a fuck. It's annoying. So it can be taken to the extreme in terms of, I'm going to live to 150. I'm going to keep all my hair no matter what. I'm going to grow 3 sets of teeth, la, 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 la. And some of that will actually come with the gene manipulation stuff as well. But then I took a half step back and I said to myself, hang on, if I'm a little bit dull in the morning and I have a cup of coffee, I'm biohacking. Primitive man living in outside, then primitive man discovering fire is biohacking. Human beings creating tools, so allowing our creativity to be used in a useful way, is always been about biohacking, because everything that we do as humans, from primitive man to modern man, arguably, as we become quote unquote modern, is all about biohacking, building roofs for our buildings, building air conditioning equipment for hot days, insulating, putting sound insulation up on Steve's wall so he doesn't have to listen to that person playing rock guitar, uh, buying a faster or more economical car. Every single thing we're doing is a kind of shortcut. And arguably, when we're talking about our bodies, we're looking for some kind of shortcut. I'm going to discuss a little bit of the ethical slash moral, perhaps, aspect, but equally, it occurred to me, and we will get into this in more depth later on, that when we take supplements, when we take PEDs, we are arguably biohacking. It's just that there's a sort of aspect to it. One of the things we actually discussed this on another show, Steve, and I used this example, I believe, twice, where I said that one of the men's magazines out of it a few years ago that was very popular at the time discussed the idea that the guys in Silicon Valley were actually using, arguably, a kind of primitive, older idea that had been used by wise men of the tribes of people living in the Amazonian jungle, and that they were trying magic mushrooms in very small dosages and micro dosing LSD to try and become super creative. The idea was that they wanted to be inspired by a dream or a vision or something like that of half an idea that was already in their brain, and this would be the next iPhone, the next Apple computer, the next whatever aspect that they could take to their company bosses, and this would be the thing that was going to make everybody in the company $1 million, and they were going to do something absolutely amazing. So they were using these ideas, these biohacks, if you will, to sort of juice themselves a little bit in terms of the
Yeah. And
creativity
we've seen
and
that with
getting that.
I
Yeah.
hate to bring this guy up, Elon Musk, who I think by now like 99% of people hate his guts, but he's
Hmm.
actually high all the time. He takes ketamine, which is a
I've, I've
stimulant.
I've seen I've
Yeah.
seen that suggested. Yeah.
And because he's involved in so many things, he has so many companies, he's CEO.
Yes. Yes.
of one of the largest companies in the world.
Yes.
He has so many privately owned companies, SpaceX
In stuff
and
into space,
pouring,
making trillions of dollars.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he
Yeah.
spends so much time on social media. At least people think it's him. I don't personally think it's him. I think he
No,
hires a staff.
some of it might be, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I think he hires a staff to troll online and stuff. But anyway, at the end of the day, like it doesn't seem plausible that someone would be able to do that much stuff. But part of the big reason
Yeah.
is like what Mobster said. He's hot. Basically, he barely sleeps and he's on stimulants all
Yeah.
fucking day. We've seen this over time too with world leaders. There's been world leaders throughout history dating back.
I can give you specific examples, Steve. Margaret Thatcher's biography, and she's not the only person, it's true of many American presidents would have been in the same position. You imagine that you're going to be the seat of power, but the reality, and she actually describes, I believe this took place, she was talking about the Falklands War. And there was a big deal behind Maggie Thatcher, the Falklands War, the SAS when they did the Iranian embassy in London, and so on and so forth. The truth was, her and I think Tony Blair later on both talked about this. American presidents have said the same. You were catnapping in the car. You sometimes got, if you were lucky, 4 hours sleep a day. You were literally being asked questions for 16, 18 hours a day. Big, obviously, presidential, prime ministerial decisions that were going to affect nations, not sort of lowering taxes, not getting more people into employment, shit to do with wars and sending troops out and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
your vision is a different thing from the
So
reality. Yeah,
yeah, so what they'll do is they'll take stimulants to wake up, and then they'll take downers to sleep, and then and then rinse and repeat day in and day out. And what happens over time? I just want to be clear about this. It's not a healthy way to do it. So biohacking can be healthy, and biohacking can be unhealthy. Monster mentioned trying to live to 105 years old. You're not going to live to 105 years old if you're basically a drug addict. If you're Elon Musk and you're a drug addict, and you have to be on uppers and then take downers to get some sleep,
yeah.
you're not
Let,
going to
let
live
me
a
give you
long
another
lifestyle.
example. This is just from the forums, Steve. Just from the
You'll
forums.
notice the face of the person. Like it's just go under the underpass in any city in America, and you'll see the junkies who they're like 40 years old, but they look like they're 70 years old because they've
Let me give
aged
you
themselves. Yeah.
one from bodybuilding, Steve, and one actually from our forums, and I'll specifically address wider forums. Mike Mensa, aka the fella that was writing Heavy Duty, was kind of obsessed with the sort of psychological, borderline guru type aspects of certain people that were putting out powerful motivational messages. Ayn Rand was one of his favorite people philosophers that he liked to mention in bodybuilding articles, and the majority of bodybuilders weren't getting this from the other writers. So the whole thing was at some point, not only was he sort of battling against the Arnold and the Weider thing of you need to do this volume, you need to do this many sets and reps, and his thing was completely in the other direction. And there's lots of back and forth about whether he did that as most of his career or just the end of his career, or whether he only did it with clients. But what happened was at some point, he started to use narcotics, certain medications, I believe coke and or stimulants, to enable him to try to put together a magazine that he decided to publish himself and certain other things he was working on. And unfortunately, as many a meth addict and speed freak will tell you, this meant he was staying awake for fucking days because of the pressure he put on himself. And legend has it, I believe this is actually true, but I'm going to say as a legend, he ended up losing the plot, start bollock naked or near naked on a freeway somewhere near where he was working, essentially ran in at the sky and had to be taken into custody for his own, his own safety in case he got run over by a truck or something, because he completely lost the plot temporarily. Fortunately for him, he still died relatively young. And I've seen this. I've talked about on stage.
49 years old.
Yeah.
He
So
died. Yep.
another person just on the forums, Pigsy, who was an absolute amazing fucking physique, fantastic. He's got some Nautilus pieces of equipment in his own barn and so on and so forth. And Pigsy is experimenting right now. There's an actual thread on it, a particular peptide, which may allow him to not only do the training stuff that he already does, which is not out there, it's not extreme, etc., etc. It's the regular kind of stuff that builds good muscular physiques and works well for people. So that would be a product called Motsi, which you can buy. via, if you want to experiment this with yourself, Umbrella Peptides. He's actually running this as a review, if you like, to see if it helps. I will put Pigsy out there as a very, very hard-working individual. He owns a vineyard. He's some days, and I've actually said 16 hours. It wouldn't surprise me if it's longer than that, Steve. When they're taking the grapes off the vine, you've got to trim the vines back. You've got to prepare them. It's not even as a farmer, but it's fucking hard work, Steve. And I've done some of this myself. But Pigsy will do some of these same things. I talked about doing it for weeks. I believe it's like 3 months of the year where he makes 90% of his income working his fucking arse off. If I'm talking about pruning or taking his grapes off the vine 16 hours a day, you still got to get the grapes transported. You've got to get them pressed. It's the busiest time, the hardest time. And the idea that you can somehow, and I've tried to do this myself, train and work out and get sleep and do family. Oh my God, you're burning the candle at both ends. I made myself feel. I made an enormous amount of money for the time, 4.5 times my regular income per week. So whatever I was on a weekly basis, Steve, I was doing 450% by doing everything I possibly could just at work, never mind anything else. Even later on, Steve, just for myself again, I've done stuff where I had the little magazine, I owned a supplement company, I was doing consults, I was coaching, and I realized I was working flat out again for money, and the only reason I wanted the money is to not have to work so hard. So what the fuck was I doing? But yeah, these times come in our lives. The problem is, as Steve quite properly says, we can biohack to a certain degree, and arguably we do this when we do use PEDs, but we also arguably trying to push. It's like revving a car. It's like having a train running downhill. Sure, we're doing 200 miles an hour, which is fantastic, but arguably we're pushing the engine, we're pushing the
When
wheels,
it
we're
comes
pushing the
to when it comes to stimulants, they do
yes, especially
catch up
Steve.
to you. They do catch up to you. What happens is with a lot of older people, they get very, very paranoid over everything. You talk to any older person, and I've dealt with these people before, and they're scared of everything. They're scared to go to a different country. It's dangerous. They're scared of going to the city. It's dangerous. They're scared of driving in downtown. It's dangerous. They're scared of even getting in a car because it's dangerous. They're scared of everything, lobster. And what happens is years of constant stimulant use, it inhibits things in your body like GABA. So for every action, you've heard of the term, I've used this before on the podcast, for every action, there's a reaction. It's like that throughout history with anything. Okay. So same thing, when you're using a stimulant to rev yourself up, you're not going to be able to turn it off. So you're going to be so fucking unable to relax when you get older. So you want to keep that in mind. So there's ways you can biohack that are healthy, and there's ways that you can biohack which are unhealthy. I like the
Yes,
healthier
yes,
aspects of
yeah,
biohacking, and
yeah,
I like the reasonable aspects of biohacking. I don't like fasting, for example. That's a healthy way to biohack. Like waking up in the morning and taking a shit ton of caffeine or taking a bunch of stimulants before you work out. I see guys walking in the gym holding 3 bottles of
yep,
drinks,
yep,
stimulant drinks that they get, like the
yep.
Red Bulls and all that shit. That's not healthy, and you're gonna
The
get
guys that
just
I
addicted
yeah,
to it. Yeah,
they're using Red Bull, Monster, etc. And the pre-workout. And one of the just on this, just to finish on the biohacking thing, and Steve's quite correct. There are ways and means, I would argue, useful ways which enable us to do more, be more creative, and so on and so forth. And equally, not to push it to the point of burnout and fucking up and losing the plot and whatever else. And just as a silly example, with the pre-workouts, and this applies to, and it's again me maybe as an older guy saying this, and with a little bit of experience, etc., etc. So hopefully sensible, hopefully useful, and that is the pre-workout thing is a classic example, Steve. I've just said before, I have thousands, probably 8,000 bodybuilding magazines here, maybe more. And the muscular development at one point was 520 something pages, Steve. And the first 30 pages would be, for the most part, at one point, because these paid the bucks, they paid for the adverts, pretty much all pre-workout products. You got the inside gatefold, then 30 pages of adverts, and then finally the contents of the magazine. And if you were lucky, between the articles, more adverts and so on. And every single one of the pre-workouts at that time claimed to be the best, the most extreme, the most potent, and so on and so forth, which was obviously impossible. They can't all be that. Only one can be that. And the problem was, for the most part, again, and caffeine is a great biohack, arguably, that pretty much all of them, in order to be the strongest, or say that they were the strongest, would not only contain your, in a single dose, the daily recommended amount of caffeine, which is approximately 350 to 400 milligrams, typically per dose of these products. They would also contain ingredients that boosted the effects of the creatine, sorry, of the caffeine. And one of the issues, and I've said this many times, and we talked about stims on the forums, was that the busiest part of a gym's day is around 5 o'clock, between probably the hours of 5 and maybe 8 o'clock, Steve. If you are using arguably, and I've actually seen people describe it thus, this is younger people again, I want to be off my tits when I train. I want to be so pumped, so wired, so strong, etc., etc. The reality is they was not as strong as they would like to be, not as pumped as they would like to be, not as big as they'd like to be. They're on the beginning of the journey. That's just the nature of the beast. But they're taking it at that part of the day when their body wants to slow the fuck down. You are taking your daily dose of caffeine in one hit. That's on over and above any coffee, etc. you've had through the day, and other stims and painkillers and meds, etc. At that time of day, Steve, and then hitting the gym. How many times do we see people that were struggling to sleep? One of the simple biohacks, just to finish on this topic, was the amount of people that struggle with sleep full stop from too much cell phone use, from too much caffeine. Here in the UK, we follow the Americans insofar as we probably consume far too much caffeine. That's in cups of British tea as well as cups of American coffee. It's become such a thing and such an industry that we're probably pushing that we shouldn't be consuming the levels that we are. So you need to look at this just on the biohacking to finish, Steve. As always, and any biohacks that we talk about, including the PEDs we will discuss, as a tool for you to use, but not something you should abuse. So the social movement aspect, I'm not that big on.
So
The use of the tool or something that might enable us to be a little bit better than we are, fine. Yeah.
let's get into gene manipulation a little bit. And gene manipulation is all about altering your DNA and change the sequences. So if we're going to go more specific, you can dumb that down a little bit and being like, well, you're changing the way your body operates. You're taking something that can alter the way your body operates. So most people refer to it as gene doping in bodybuilding, and it's designed to enhance the body to boost physical capabilities, obviously. Now, the main things that are wanted are endurance, strength, and muscle growth. You want to go into your workout with a lot of fucking energy. You want a lot of wind. You don't want to 30 minutes into your workout, kind of lose gas, if that makes sense. You also want to be strong your entire workout. You want to have muscle growth, more muscle growth from your workouts. The bodybuilders want to make sure body fat comes off and stays off year round. Now, there's several peptides that exist in bodybuilding that bodybuilders are all over, and that includes IGF-1 and follistatin. And they can do things like split and grow muscle cells and inhibit myostatin. Mobster mentioned in the last segment. It's another one that is used to boost metabolic health. It's used to boost longevity and well-being that guys are starting to use as well. I see there's one guy in our forum, he's a wrestler, he's using it. Another thing that has been historically used in more endurance sports is EPO. Not so much anymore, but they used to use it quite a bit, Mobster. And that stimulates more red blood cells, gives an athletes more oxygen to the muscles and boosting your endurance. It was used in any type of endurance sport back in the day, in Olympics and all that stuff. Track stars were using it, long distance runners were using it, bicyclists were using it.
Yeah.
Obviously, it gives you a huge advantage rather than drawing blood out of your body and then putting the
Yeah.
blood back in right
What
before.
was the other aspect, Steve? It was mimicking the effects of training at high altitude without the necessity
Yeah,
of actually wearing a mask or
yeah.
training
So
at high
so
altitude.
guys
So
would
yeah,
train physically at a high. They'll go to Denver, go to Colorado, and train up in the mountains, or to bicycle up in the mountains. And then when they actually bicycled in Hawaii for the triathlon, the big triathlon, it would be so much easier. Although Hawaii does have a lot of altitude too, so maybe that's not a good example. But let's say they're training in Florida, for example, then it would be flat, and it'd be like, wow, this is easy. I'm not at high altitudes. We've seen kickers in the NFL. they, kick longer field goals in Denver because it's the mile high city and the ball will travel further because of the thinner oxygen in the air. So lots of ways to do that. That would be a biohack, mobster. So going and training at high altitudes for a race that's in a zero altitude place, that would be a
Yes.
biohack. But gene
Yes.
manipulation is actually more taking something. So we've also
Yes.
seen other examples. This is more of a crude example, more modern example with the GLP-1s. We've talked about them on prior podcasts, the retatrutide, semaglutide, tirzepatide, and there's others too that are out there. And they change the way your body acts to turn you into a fat burning machine. And then finally, things like GW 501, 516, which is a PPAR agonist, which will make your endurance better and help you burn fat. So there's lots of different ways we manipulate, not specifically the genes necessarily, but just the way our
No.
body has. When you put these in
Yes.
your body, they change things in your body to turn you more into endurance, turn you more into muscle gains, turn you more into inhibiting myostatin, turn you more, make it easier to build muscle strength, and make it easy, of course, to burn body fat. So these are all different little strategies that we've learned over years. It's quite fascinating just to see all the different peptides
Yeah.
that are
Yeah.
out there that people are using and experimenting with that are giving them that edge. It may be a 5% edge, 10% edge, 15% edge, whatever it happens to be, but there is an edge. I can go for a 1 mile run with GW in my system and I would knock 20, 30, 40 seconds off my time every time when it's in my system. Without it in my system, I'm slower. So these things really do work. And there's so many different ones out there. And it's quite fascinating to see,
Yeah.
how we're utilizing them.
There's a couple of examples of perhaps the extreme, and I have to make sure that we're aware of this as well. So an obvious, very simplistic example would be Man and Superman, Steve, and that's been discussed philosophically as well as the idea of genetically. And we see this in every single cartoon, comic book, superhero, Marvel universe, whatever you like, kind of movie. Okay, heck, it's even in the Star Wars movie with the drones, Steve. All the stormtroopers are drones. So this whole thing of the idea that we can somehow, by accident, as it quite often is in the comic books, I've seen just on my Facebook feed, there's a gym rats comic that's just about to come out. And ironically, gym rats is a term that we use in bodybuilding with the idea of us going to the gym and being there all the time training. And the idea is that he consumes some medication and then at some point literally draws blood from a genetically modified rat and turns into a muscular fighting rat man, something or other. So this is a kind of almost superhuman, super idea. There's certain particular aspects to it. There's other aspects, sorry, just from the bodybuilding perspective, and I'm reminded of the people that got a little tiny bit carried away with the site injection type products, oils. And so we got people that would be correcting perhaps a flaw or even physical damage to a calf muscle and enabling their already fantastic physique that they worked very hard on to just have look their little tiny bit better by injecting in a perhaps a place where they'd had an injury in their calf and enable the whole physique being presented on stage to look that much better, to the more extreme example of the one or two South American, I believe, Brazilian guys that have ended up kind of insta famous on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube videos where they have taken it to the oomph degree, Steve. Huge fucking great bloated arms that are full of oil and no other sort of appreciable muscle. And it's like, looking at them, there's something psychiatrically, there's like a mental illness going on there. So one of the things we talked about, even with the whole thing with myostatin, as we said, if myostatin inhibitors worked to the degree that we imagine they might work, would we then go ahead and inject this myostatin inhibitor into our arms, to our shoulders, into our chest, and end up looking like something cartoonish and so on and so forth? And if you've got any kind of dysmorphia, especially the serious kind, the extreme kind, if you've got any kind of psychological issues in terms of how you perceive yourself or the image you want to present to the world, would certain individuals, with a small percentage, take it to their nth degree? And the answer is yes. Now, let's imagine that we all chose to do that. Well, we'd all end up looking the fucking same, which kind of negates the whole point of being a big motherfucker versus the average person. we get into that. We could get into the whole arguments about racial purity, which I do not want to discuss on this show, but we could talk about, literally creating some sort of genetic medication. So Steve's asked me to explain what a myostatin inhibitor is. Literally, the body has in it an ability to stop you getting too big too quick so that your muscles don't tear off the bone or damage the connective tissue. It limits its growth to some small degree. In one or two animals where it exists, you have what's called a double muscle. And you can see pictures of Belgian blue cattle, as an example, and one or two, I think, dogs they've done it with, and even sheep, where it looks cartoonishly overly muscled. A greyhound that looks like a bulldog, a cow that is twice the size and ripped with veins, Steve, and it looks like a weirdly deformed, overly muscular piece of cattle, a bull, so on and so forth. The idea that we would use it in bodybuilding so we could all be 400 pounds is where that kind of grows. If we one of the examples I used looking at the extremes to which genetic engineering or modification could take place, Steve, would be, for argument's sake, and this is actually pointed out in the thread that inspired this show. They said if, for example, we removed some elements of schizophrenia, some elements of autism, ADHD, certain things that enable some people to be artists specifically, poets, people that write movies, people that write books, scientists themselves, some of the great geniuses of our age, male, female, no matter what country, race, ethnicity, whatever they've come from. And these people were borderline legendary in society for their ability to do certain particular things. Stephen Hawkins would be a good example. You used Elon Musk earlier on. We could argue about Elon Musk, but he's an incredibly rich, incredibly creative person. Is he a nice person? Probably not. Stephen Hawkins might have been a bit of a dick if he didn't have the wheelchair when he was alive. Steve, who the fuck knows?
Some of them need some of them just didn't grow up with love. You can tell they didn't grow up with
yeah,
love, so
yeah,
they don't
or they were
know
pushed too
yeah.
hard, or,
And
or,
then
or
they end
whatever.
up,
Yeah,
they get
or they
divorced
had no
10
restrictions.
times.
They were allowed
Yeah.
to do certain things that no one said
Yeah.
no to. But one of the problems you have, some arguments of their physical makeup and their personality are arguably outside the norm. And if we allow genetic engineering to go to its nth degree again, we remove these extremes and we kind of make everybody average looking with the normal health, etc., etc. If, for example, what would be the big deal about living to 150 if everybody lived to 150? There are goods and bads. The good aspect would be, for example, and I'm going to quote Stephen Fry here when he says about when he's discussing religion, he says, if there's a God, why does he allow children to have cancer? So you go, okay, let's remove childhood cancers. That's a good thing. Okay, but what about the fact that we're an overpopulated planet? Yeah, you're right there. So maybe the childhood cancer, we should keep it. And then you have these back and forth arguments, which are probably not for this show, but they become extreme again. You say, oh, I don't think we should have any Chinese. Let's remove the Chinese. It gets really, really crazy. Everybody should have blue eyes. Well, then if we all look the fucking same, what becomes attractive? And then there's an argument to be made, and this is probably more moving on to the next aspect of what we're talking about. And what made me think whether we want to take these things in the essence that they were given, i.e., the extreme biohacking and the extremes of genetic engineering, and that is this. Steve and I, just as an example, we've discussed this many times on these shows, there's probably about a foot of height between us. Steve's at the normal end of the range for shorter, and I'm not even at the upper end of the range for taller, but I'm taller than average.
I wish I was normal. Are you kidding me or
Well,
what?
you are. You're not a midget or a dwarf, Steve. You're just towards the shorter end. So Steve's around 5'4", 5'5", and I'm
No, I'm
6 foot.
5'6". I'm five foot
Oh,
six.
5'6".
I'm not 5'4". What are you talking about? Yeah.
He's wearing his built-up shoes today. So I'm teasing Steve, but the reality is, where there's a value, right? There's an argument to be made that perhaps I wouldn't be as big and muscular as I am if I wasn't as tall. Some of that genetics comes from my parents and relatives of theirs.
Well,
Physically,
you
I'm the
gotta
only
be
one.
tall so you can reach up and steal things.
Yeah, exactly. Pass
The
food.
long
That's you when
arms,
you
right?
can't get to the top shelf.
Someone said that one time and they
But
got so mad.
there's
Someone
all
told an
bits and
Irish person
pieces.
that one time, "Oh, you guys have long arms because your ancestors had to reach out and steal
I'll
things."
give you an example, Steve. As a teenager, the moment I shot up age 15, it's one of those things when you don't realize how tall you've become. And we got the double decker buses here in the UK, the old Route Master bus. And I was forever hitting my fucking head on the ceiling of both the lower deck and the upper deck of the bus. And it just got really, really annoying. And then a quick one for you is when we first set up the company, I went up to Gloucester to look at property where I moved and then ran into the house as we were unloading the truck and headbutted the fuck out of the doorway, ended up on my ass on the gravel in the car park. So look, the whole thing is it would be too easy in terms of certain things. I believe there's a value to the journey, Steve, in terms of training, lifting, and the time under the bar and learning what you do to become a better lifter, a better bodybuilder. Equally, and we're going to move on to this now, Steve and I have and probably will do again, and I'm on TRT right now. We're biohacking. We use performance enhancing drugs. We use steroids. So this is the thing. Let's talk about that now, Stephen. What we typically do as bodybuilders and weightlifters, with some suggestions of products and cycles as well.
Yeah, so Mobster, do you think overall is the science there yet? And where do you see us going?
Yeah, so I would argue that no, the science isn't there yet. The whole sort of mapping of the human gene thing was supposed to have taken a very, very long time, but the advancement of computer technology and the ability to process the information enabled us to map it far, far quicker. I believe at some point, Steve, a few years ago, pre-COVID, I think we were looking at 25 to 30 years, and we did it in like 5 years. So, ironically, technology enabled us to do something like that very, very quickly. We kind of identify huge parts of the gene and know what they do and know what the removal does. But equally, we also understand that sometimes leaving them there as an off switch enables an on switch to work. So do we modify it or don't we? There's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. And it's being discussed both ethically, morally, and obviously via experiments in the lab only at this particular point. There are some aspects, whether we're talking about stem cells, for example, and certain particular things. And one of the great advantages of understanding how the genes work is developing medications to block or put switches that are on to off position, but they stay as they are. The genes still exist. It's just being blocked from working rather than being modified, and so on. So I would argue that the science isn't there yet. The moment it exists, the moment it happens, and I'm thinking specifically, for example, of you and I would call a selectively true myostatin inhibitor, I guarantee you that some slightly wealthy bodybuilding type will put that stuff out there, and as soon as we're able to, certain products will be processed very, very quickly. The price will come down very quickly, and bodybuilders, weightlifters, myself included, strength athletes, etc., are notorious for looking at these particular things over and above, for example, perhaps the people who are worried about the balding gene or the aging issue. I think probably we're more likely to experiment with these kind of medications and products when they're available. In terms of actual proper genetic manipulation as such right now, I'm going to say no, not just yet, Steve.
So let's get into PED biohacking. And look, anabolic steroids, absolutely, they break down barriers that help you build muscle and strength that you wouldn't be able to do without them. I'll use myself an example, and then Mobster can use a self example. I'll talk about him as well. But Mobster, he's over 60 years old. If you look at his log, you could see he posted a picture today how big his back is, how muscular his back is, how thick his back is, how strong it is. He can bench press a fucking Buick. He could squat like a shit ton of weight. I mean, over, if you combine his powerlifting weights, he lifts literally a ton. He lifts literally what an elephant can lift. And he's absolutely strong. Why? Because anabolic steroids have helped him go to another level. When I ran Trenbolone for 3 years off and on, this was back in my early to mid 30s, I was able to get beyond anything when it comes to strength and size that I would have never been able to accomplish naturally. I got so strong in the process that I blew out my shoulder. Also had 3 herniated discs pop up because my body just couldn't handle how strong I got. So steroids absolutely work. And they are a necessity if you want to get to where you want to go and beyond where you want to go. And the way they work is they boost protein synthesis in the body. They help boost metabolism in the body. They bind to sex hormone binding globulin, which breaks down the barrier to allow you to take things to the next level and allows your body's fighting. Your body's always fighting. It wants to lose muscle. It wants to lose strength. It wants to put on body fat. These are survival mechanisms. Our ancestors 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, a million years ago, did not want a lot of muscle on their frame. They needed to be able to move and to get away from predators. They needed to be able to climb. They needed to be able to conserve body fat to be used at a later time. So the body wants to keep hold on to body fat because what happens if there's a famine? When that over time there was an incident in human history. I believe Mobster was like 100,000 years ago. I'm not really sure though, so don't quote me on that. I'm getting my timelines off, but we had a incident where the Earth for several months went dark because we had a big dust cloud from a meteor or something like that, and 90% of our ancestors died.
Yeah,
There was only a
yeah,
few hundred of us left. A few hundred only. I think there was like four,
yeah.
five, six
I,
hundred, and only
I
200.
seem to recall that we've had throughout the whole of history of the planet Earth something like 7 occasions, including the one that Steve's on about, where essentially all life
Yeah,
on Earth was extinguished, or almost all life on Earth was
yeah.
extinguished, and we've
Well,
had
the
to sort of come back from
dinosaurs,
that.
they couldn't handle it because the dinosaurs had to constantly be eating day in and day out. They had to eat a lot of food. They had to take in a lot of calories. So the dinosaurs couldn't survive at all without food. But as human beings, we were able to survive without food. We were able to conserve our body fat. The ones that conserve their body fat to be used at a later time to survive that famine were able to make it through. It was a miserable, miserable time to be a Homo sapien, but we were able to survive. Now, our competitors, the hominoid competitors like the Neanderthals and the others, there were like, I think 5 or 6 of them, they were not able to survive because they could not handle going through a famine state. So our body naturally, it's just the way it is. Our body naturally wants to put on body fat and naturally wants to get rid of muscle and strength in the process because that makes us survive longer. Look at any older healthy person, 90 years old. They all look the same. They're all short and they're all very skinny. You don't see big guys mobster size who are 90 years old. You don't see 300-pound, 6 foot
Nope,
something mobsters
nope,
walking
nope,
around unless
nope.
they're on a shit ton of medication and
Even then,
to keep them alive. But I mean, I'm talking about a healthy. You're talking about if you're ever traveling, into another country or something, you run into
oh God, yeah, don't, mate. Honestly, especially
yeah,
if you're not paying premium, you're stuck in your cattle class, knees under your chin, back
yeah.
aching, and the
So
same
anabolic
like everybody else. Yeah.
So PEDs absolutely they give you a big, but it's in a different way than some of these other products we talked about earlier. So Mobster, get into start talking
Well, I
about
mean,
that.
look, one of the things, just to the basics, and I covered with Steve in the pre-show, said, look, right from day one, almost from day one, and actually, Steve and I have covered this on shows, the whole sort of should you use steroids or not, from fucking day one of any athletic competition, and I'm talking about ancient history shit to the modern times. Man has looked for an edge. I've literally used this one before, Steve, where it was either the ancient Greeks or the Romans were arguing whether it was fair to run in sandals in the races or run barefoot. So literally, we talked about them eating the bull's testicles as a way of getting the animal's essence, their early form of the sort of thought process in terms of getting testosterone to make them more masculine, bigger, more muscular, a better athlete. So from day one. Now, when it comes to starting to train, starting to live, starting to do fitness type lifestyle stuff, we've discussed vitamins, we've discussed creatine, we've discussed fish oils, we discussed, or mentioned earlier in the show, having a cup of coffee before you go to the gym instead of a pre-workout. Blah, blah, blah. So all of these things are biohacking. So the idea that steroids has to be included, PEDs, performance enhancing drugs, has to be included. These are all kind of biohacks. So as a really simple example, and Steve and I have done this, and I'm looking at sort of some of the Geneza products right now, Steve, I would have used a very similar product to Geneza's Dynabol back in the day. That is a biohack. Me taking Dynabol to take my testosterone levels from what my body was capable of producing then at age 37, in my example, to what it was being given in the form of something like Geneza's Dynabol, and it would have been over and above. If my body was naturally able to produce somewhere between 70 to 90 nanograms a deciliter, me using just a very simple, as I believe I did at the beginning, Steve, 30 milligrams a day of Dynabol takes me to 210 milligrams a week, which on a like for like basis means I'm essentially giving myself just at 30 milligrams a day of Dynabol 2+ times what my body can naturally produce. And that's assuming I'm just in the average area. Even 2+ times if I'm at the upper end of the normal amount produced by the body. And that, again, is just using somewhere between 30 to 50 milligrams a day. In that example, Steve, of Dynabol for 4 to 8 weeks. Give an example of a simple cycle that you've done using Geneza
Yeah.
products, Steve, and how much of a biohack that would have been above what you would have been capable of.
Yeah, and let me talk about that in a second. Let me first talk about self-TRT, self-TRT with Geneza Pharma testosterone, which would be a great way that you can help feel younger, boost libido, have proper testosterone levels. A lot of people are going that route. I can argue that's a biohack. Let's say you're 40, 50 years old and you've got low testosterone levels. Well,
Absolutely a
yeah,
biohack, Steve. Yeah.
I mean, in prior time, you would be having just to live miserable. And now you can go on TRT. I know Mobster went on TRT recently, last couple of years, and it's
Yep.
helped him a lot. So a lot of people are choosing to go the self TRT route with the Geneza Pharma because their products are easy to access and affordable. Now a good cycle. Let's say you wanted to have a beach body. You're like, fuck this. I'm done with the dad bod. I want to have a beach body. A year from now, I want to be walking on the beach with nice abs and everything. Well, things like the Geneza Pharma Primobolan or the Equipoise would be great options. You could use them at 500 milligrams each, throw in a little testosterone in there, and then use some Anavar with there. And then you can add Winstrol to finish or some Masteron to finish. And Geneza Pharma has all of that. So those are great cutting and recomp options. You got to combine that with proper diet, proper training, do your fasting, do all those things you have to do to really have a rock hard body. And you use some of the biohack ideas we talked about earlier with some of these drugs or peptides that we talked about to make you feel younger and make it easier for you to burn body fat. So those would
Yeah.
be a great stack right there from Geneza Pharma. Talk about a good
Let me just,
strength
yeah,
stack for a hack.
a strength stack example. I mean, I've used this for strength. It's just as good for bulk, and arguably as a biohack when it comes to your appetite, Steve. So one of my favorite bulking stacks, which I've also used at the same time to boost my strength, and I'll refer to Anavar momentarily, is the idea of using Deca, GP Deca, and GP Sustanon to blow myself the fuck up from 280 pounds, as was back in the day, to close to 300 pounds. The last time I blew the fuck up on Sustain Decker, Steve, 336 pounds, 153 kilos, the most I've ever weighed in my life. And arguably, overall, especially back in the day when I was competing regularly, my strongest overall, although I've done some epic shit recently. Just as an example, one of my favorite ones, sorry, what am I looking at there, Steve? Somewhere between 600 and 800 milligrams combined total per week on the idea of dosing both the products on a twice per week basis to average out around the 800 milligrams. And that works for me on a 4 to 8 weeks, typically 8 weeks back in the day. One of my favorite strength orals, and I've said this a million times, guys, is Anavar, and GP does a great Anavar. And the idea of 30 to 50 milligrams a day, 4 to 8 weeks, and especially at the end. And this is something I want to focus on a little bit as well. And this is where the biohacking works, but also the journey that I touched upon at the beginning of the show works. So I will, as Steve will, and I would imagine the majority of listeners will, work your fucking ass off for as much time as possible. And then towards the end of, say, this macro cycle, this lengthy 12, 14, 15 weeks without any PDs, then introduce, just as shit starts to get hard or real or whatever you want to call it, then introduce, in my case, the Anavar for the last 4 weeks to take myself, let's say for competitive purposes, and I'll just use this as an idea, I do more than this, but I'm just putting this number out there. Let's say that my best bench press ever was 2 plates aside, 100 kilograms, 225 pounds. And I've worked my ass off from 60 to 100 kilos, 225 pounds for the last how many weeks? But I want to bench 2.5 plates. I want to do 2.25, whatever. I want to go into new territory. The end of my training cycle is when I would then introduce the Anavar, the last 4, 6, 7, 8 weeks. And that should push me up to the point where I'm doing 105, 110 kilos, which is instead of 225, 240, 250 pounds, Steve. And therefore, I've gone into somewhere new. But I've also done the work. I've been tight on my diet, whether I'm cutting, bulking, or strength training. I've done the hard work in the fucking gym, benching the fuck out of my chest, working my back, working my grip, whatever, to make my bench press better. And then the latter part of that strength training macro cycle, I do a short cycle, 4 to 8 weeks of Anavar to push me into new territory and new strength. Some of which I want to keep when I go back, come off cycle, and I go back to normal training or TRT, as would be my example, and keep some of the extra strength from before. So instead of benching 225, I'm benching 230, 235. Maybe not the 250 I was on cycle, but still 5 or 10 pounds more than I was before. The same thing would apply if I was trying to improve my strength, or sorry, my chest, my arms, my time on the track, how hard my muscles feel for going down the beach, like Steve said, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, give them a sort of an endurance cycle, Steve. I know that's something you're quite familiar with for people that do the kind of track, running, 5Ks, etc., like yourself.
Yeah, you could do equipoise, as I said earlier. Toronto ball would be a good option as well, but keep the doses low and make sure that you are, you know, you're kind of changing up your dosing as you go. You don't want to run too much. It can actually be counterproductive. So anabolic steroids, you run a bunch of anabolic steroids and can end up backfiring on you big time. And then Geneza Pharma also has some great growth hormone as well. And growth hormone can be used in any of these situations. You can use it for cutting, bulking, recomp, endurance, lots of different things, recovery, anti-aging. There's all kinds of ways to use growth hormone as well. And growth hormone used to be, back when I first got into PEDs, used to be 20 years ago, very hard to find growth hormone, almost impossible, I would say. And if you were able to find it, it was extremely expensive and you would get selective scams. So you get a kit from someone, it'd be legitimate growth hormone, then you go back and get another kit from someone and it would be fake. So that's the way things used to be in those days. There was no way to test out these products. So you'd have to basically be at the mercy of your source, and they can do whatever the hell they want. They can sell you what they used to do back in the days. They used to sell HGH as HCG, and people wouldn't know the difference. So that you'd be taking what you thought was HGH, but you really taking HCG, which costs like 80% less to produce. And the sources were making a killing off of people, and people weren't be able to figure it out. So at the end of the day, we're very blessed to have Geneza Pharma. And Geneza Pharma is recommended for many reasons. I'm just going to go over the top 5 reasons I recommend Geneza Pharma. Number one, fast shipping. And again, back in the day, those of you who have no clue the way things used to be before Amazon came along. Now you can order pretty much anything on Amazon. You order it through Prime, you get it the next day. I don't know if it's like that in Britain, Mobster, but in America, that's how it is. Like I can order something and even get it the same day from Amazon. Like someone will come by and actually drop it off at my house. So Geneza Pharma, look, they're not going to deliver the same day, but they are going to deliver pretty goddamn fast. So if you order from them, whether you order domestic or internationally, you can expect very, very fast compared to other sources. Number two, easy ordering. You go on their website, you order anything you want on their website. It's a one-stop shop. They have everything, Monster, from steroids to a lot of these products we talked about, dick drugs,
Yeah.
ancillaries, on cycle, off cycle. They have everything. Number three,
How
great
much
prices.
of a biohack, Steve, is ED drugs? Older men not able to perform the same as when they were younger men, and Geneza does some great products. Now able to perform exactly the same. In fact, sometimes better
Yeah.
when we're younger. That is a
So I'll let you,
biohack and
let
a half right there.
me
Yeah.
go through the list and I'll let you finish up, Mobster. And then number three, great prices. This is huge. So Geneza Pharma, look, they're not the cheapest, but they're also very, very affordable. Again, 20 years ago, if you ordered a cycle online, when they started selling cycles online, it was expensive. I can remember I spent like $1,200 on a cycle. You're not going to spend anything close to that from Geneza Pharma, unless you're getting a lot of stuff. But they have excellent prices, and they are really, really. one of my favorites out there. It's allowed a different segment of the demographic to come into play to use anabolic steroids. When I first started anabolic steroids, it was only white collar people who were ordering steroids, doctors, lawyers, accountants, people in finance, stuff like that. Now we have people who are just construction workers, painters, roofers, electricians, all kinds of plumbers, all kinds of people like that who are ordering because the prices are so affordable now that anybody can afford the prices. Number four, great customer service. They are on top of things. If you have a question or concern, you can even, hit up some reps that are on the forum. They're all over the forums and they will help you, or you can just email them on the website. They will help you out. And then number five, 99% pure products that are legitimate. I talked about this earlier. Back in the day, there was no way to test out these products. Now we can test them out. We can send them out. We can get them Janochick tested, Janochick, whatever you want to call it, and they will actually test it out for you and give you the results. So you're not going to pull one on anyone now. We have always been on top of this when it comes to any of the sources or brands that we recommend on this podcast or any of the sources of brands we recommend on the forum. We have them checked out randomly and anonymously. And the source and the brand is not aware that we're doing that. And we do that to make sure the quality is always there. So they are constantly testing at least 98.5, 99.5%, which is higher than what is required at a pharmacy. So, Mobster, touch on
Yeah.
Geneza Pharma a little bit. I'll let you have the floor.
I'm going to say, just for biohacking, and especially when it comes to PEDs, I think I've used this phrase before, Steve, and I think I might even sound like Winston Churchill. You've never had it so good. I believe that certain one of the UK prime ministers, I think, used that phrase. You have accessibility like you've never had before. If you want to talk about a brand, you can review the brand, you can do research on the brand in a way that we could not do 20 or 30 years ago, certainly not 30 years ago. Pre 2000, pre 1990, information was limited. Accessibility to the information was limited. You had to go to the fucking research section of university to read about steroids. The only information you would get was off your buddies down the gym if you were lucky, if you was an insider. The only drugs that you could buy was what was available from the dealer out of the trunk of his car. And it might not be what you actually needed. The amount of drugs that were fucking faked was unreal. The prices just in the last 20 years, in any metric you care to think about, are cheaper than they've ever been. The raws that are coming out of China and other places is by the fucking ton, not by the kilogram, not by the pound, by the ton. There's literally massive manufacturing plants producing the raws. We've seen photographs, we've talked about this, literal laboratory photographs of the scales and the mechanisms and machines that they've used in his lab, secondhand scales to measure the milligrams of $25,000. That's a used price, Steve. Never mind I think it's $100,000. And there are underground labs that are spending that kind of money, companies like Geneza that are spending that kind of money, real big fucking proper money to produce quality products. The labels, just the labels have changed, the holograms, the batch numbers, the embossing, the things that you would expect from a pharmaceutical company's labs like Geneza do. The testing, in-house, second party, third party, randomized testing, more accessibility to the information coming out of universities now. Steve and I have been quoting GLP studies left, right, and center. Every new study that comes out, we've looked at the latest information when we've done that stuff. Again, I could go back just in my own, because I'm a little bit older than Steve, just my own history in terms of PED use, and the information was available, and being able to source products. We knew that products that came out of India, in fact, and I think Iran were good, but I couldn't tell you the name of a brand. I've got no idea. I literally, if someone says to me this was a good brand back in the day, Steve, in a 1 milligram or 1 mil ampule, I was good to go because I knew the person themselves. Now, you and I can get products from all over the world from a variety of sources, just exactly like Geneza. So if a company goes, and the thing that Steve said, and I want to focus on this last bit as well. When we were talking about, Steve said about approved sources, etc., like Geneza, absolutely. We want you to be able to come to Evolutionary, talk about a source. We can tell you if they're legit or not. We can recommend products we've used ourselves from companies like Geneza that we know that we've used, or buddies of ours on the forum have used, and we can point you at that person They've used that particular product. I haven't used that particular product. I've tried this product that they haven't, and so on and so forth. We can show you in a way that you never saw before the lab test. You yourself, as Steve was trying to say earlier on, can use the same fucking lab that all of the top brands, all of our approved sources use to, and not only can you confirm that the lab test you're looking at is that legit, but you can yourself, at a much more reasonable expense than you ever could in the past, take a product that you brought from a source that is that brand that you know about. And if you're a little tiny bit worried, spend a couple of $100, send it to the same lab yourself and get the same kind of test results back. And as we said, when we know that this has been done, what you might call blind randomized testing, where the labs themselves didn't know that their products were going to be tested. They've not sent this to a lab in-house. It's not gone to a lab that they sent it to, but a customer sent it to a lab. All of the approved sources, including Geneza, came back within a few percent. I think it was a 2 or 3% deviation was the biggest range. Most were there or thereabouts. And everything was in the numbers that are allowable within the pharmaceutical industry, as Steve said. So look, guys, what do you think biohacks are? What's your thoughts on genetic manipulation? Have we perhaps gone too far with the thought process and taken it to the extreme? Or would you grab this opportunity with both hands and just see where the fuck this is going to take you? Is there a value, as I suggest, to some parts of the journey, the grind, putting in the work, and then allowing a biohack or two to assist you that little bit further? Or am I talking out my ass? Come on the forums and let us know. Let us know your thoughts. As always, please note we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It's our view based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment apply.